Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in today. I am super excited to talk to you from the book of Exodus, chapters 1, 2, and 3. But before I dive into the book of Exodus, I want to go back to the book of Genesis because I believe there are some important names in the book of Genesis that will help us understand where we are in Exodus. So there is this guy named Joseph, and he has many brothers, and they are jealous of him. And because of their jealousy, they sold him into slavery, and from there he ends up in the land of Egypt. Okay, so now let's go to Exodus. There are a couple verses that stick out to me in chapter 2. So the first verse is verse 23. It says, after a long time, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned because of their difficult labor, and they cried out, and their cry for help ascended to God because of the difficult labor. So we know that they are in difficult labor. They cried out to the Lord because they are in difficult labor. But what I just told you, if it wasn't because of their jealous great old cousins, then Joseph would have never been in the land of Egypt, and his offsprings would have never been in the land of Egypt. And not only that, they would have never become slaves. Okay, so what's more cool about chapter 2 is verse 24. So God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the Israelites, and he took notice. I find it super amazing that one verse later, after the Israelites cried out, the Lord heard them, but he didn't only hear them, he noticed and he acted. He took notice and he acted upon it. And so what's really cool about this is that God says, I remember the covenant that I gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why is this important in the book of Exodus for the Israelites? Because the Israelites, they are an offspring of Abraham. Abraham has received a promise from God. In the book of Genesis 15:5, he tells Abraham that your offspring will be greatly multiplied, and they will outnumber the stars of heaven. So the Israelites, they are an offspring of Abraham. Abraham has received a promise from God in the book of Genesis, and God does not void his promises, but he only fulfills them. So he also tells him that there is a promised land for them, and we know that the Israelites are in bondage. They are in slavery right now, so we know that this is not the promised land. So in verse 23, they cry out. And I also want to touch that when you cry out to the Lord, those tears that roll down your face that you may think are just hitting your sweatshirt or your t-shirt or the ground that you sit on, they mean so much more to our Heavenly Father. In the book of Psalms, it tells us that he collects them. God collects our tears. What does he do with them? I have no idea, but you have your own personal jar of tears that are so personal to God that he collects them. And so in verse 23, they cry out. In verse 24, he hears them and he takes notice. In chapter 3, he takes notice in verse 10, it says, therefore go, I am sending you to Pharaoh. He's talking about Moses, so that you may lead my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And then Moses responds and says, but God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and I should bring the Israelites out of Egypt? I don't know about you, but I'm not joking. That's how I talk to God sometimes when he put a calling on my life. I'm like, God, why did you choose me? Who am I that I'm going to fulfill this calling that you have given me? And so God responds and he answers and says, I will certainly be with you, and this will be the sign to you that I have sent you. When you bring the people out of Egypt, you will all worship God at this mountain. So you guys on your own time, go and read the book of Genesis as well as the book of Exodus, because it's a really good read, because we know that the Israelites, had Joseph's brothers not been jealous, Joseph would not have been in the land of Egypt, and their offsprings would not have been in Egypt, and they would have never been slaves. Okay, so your sin affects other people, whether you see it or not. Also, in verse 23, the people cry out. Verse 24, God answers. God sends Moses. And I just want you guys to know that you may feel like you are in the land of Egypt right now during this COVID-19. And you may have cried out to God these last couple months that have looked extremely different than normal for you. And you may not hear God, and you may not see God, and you may feel like everything is going backwards. But I want you to know that He remembers what He has promised to us, those who believe, and He will never leave us or forsake us, and He will supply all of our needs. But greater than this, those who believe, there is a promised land that has been promised to us, and that is heaven. So hold your heads high. God sees you, He remembers you, and He takes notice. If He already haven't taken notice in your life that you can't see it, my friend, He is on the way. I love you guys. You guys have a blessed day.